And I'm hitting start webinar.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our Solar 101 session. I'm Dan Robinson, the Northern Field Organizer for Solar United Neighbors, and I'm here with Zach Schalk, the Program Director for the state of Indiana. We're really excited. We had a great turnout for the webinar tonight, and we're just going to dive right in, get started. This is Solar 101 here on Thursday, the June 24th, just in case you're wondering, am I in the right spot? We are in the right spot tonight. I want to thank everybody for joining us. To get started, we're going to do a little housekeeping, and I'm going to let Zach take care of that.
All right, thank you, Dan. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight. As Dan mentioned, my name is Zach Schalk. I'm the Indiana Program Director for Solar United Neighbors. Dan is going to be doing the bulk of the presenting tonight, but I will be on the line to help answer questions and to monitor the chat. So we do just want to do some quick housekeeping up top. Hopefully most folks are familiar with Zoom by now, but we just want to make sure everybody's comfortable with the platform. Hopefully at this point you've been able to select the audio for your presentation. You can either join on your computer or use a phone with the information provided. We are going to keep the chat active throughout the presentation, so please submit questions anytime via the chat. You'll have an option to submit questions either just to the panelists or to everyone. I think the default is actually to submit questions just to the panelists, but I will encourage everybody to click on the drop down where it says to all panelists and click all panelists and attendees. That makes sure that everybody sees the question. We've got a lot of really smart folks on tonight, and we want to make sure everybody's able to benefit from your questions. We have some solar owners on the line too, so they might be able to hop in and answer your questions as well. So please make sure when you're sending questions, if you can, to select all panelists and attendees. And then finally, this webinar is being recorded, and we will send a copy of the recording out to everybody who RSVP'd after the event is ended. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Dan for the rest of the presentation.
All right, thanks, Zach. Before we get started into the bulk of the presentation, we want to just say a quick word about working for equity. Communities of color, particularly Black and Indigenous communities, bear an unfair share cost of energy production, but receive fewer benefits. Families of color are disproportionately harmed by higher utility bills and shutoffs. And on top of that, housing discrimination is a barrier to home ownership and thus solar ownership. When Sun started with a group of economically and racially diverse neighbors, they focused on solar because it helped people pay their utility bills. It also helped them stay in their homes at a time when Washington, D.C. was being gentrified quickly and the whole country was in the middle of a financial crisis. Rooftop solar lets communities invest locally, create good local jobs, and brings control of the energy system within our reach. We're working toward a new energy system that everyone can participate in, one that is fair and equitable. So the we in those sentences is Solar United Neighbors. We are a national 501c3 nonprofit that started back in 2007 in Washington, D.C. We're leading solar education and outreach organizations, and we help Hoosiers go solar, join together, and fight for their energy rights. We have a lot of co-ops going on around the state of Indiana right now. We have active co-ops that are open for people to join them in Indianapolis, Boone County, and Hamilton County, in the central part of the state. We also have active co-ops in the Fort Wayne area, up in the northeast part of the state, and in northern Indiana, in the four-county region of St. Joe, Elkhart, Marshall, and Kosciuszko County. And we're going to be soon opening a second co-op in northwestern Indiana, 3 counties hugging Lake Michigan. We had one there last year, and we're going to be starting one up soon, later this summer or early fall. And Zach's going to post links to in the chat box to the web pages for those co-ops, and we're also going to have them at the end of the presentation as well. To make all that happen, we work with a lot of folks, a lot of statewide partners, and in particular, I want to recognize Solarize Indiana, because they are working with us as a statewide partner in the northern Indiana co-op, those 4 counties I mentioned, as well as in the Fort Wayne area, in Indianapolis, and I believe in Hamilton County as well. So they are co-sponsoring those co-ops with us, and they are also operating co-ops in other parts of Indiana. So a shout out to Solarize. But we also work with a number of other statewide organizations: Earth Charter Indiana, Hoosier Environmental Council, the Sierra Club's Hoosier chapter, the Hoosier EVA group, Hoosier Interfaith Power and Light, and Citizens Action Coalition. But then in the co-op areas themselves, we are partnering with a number of local organizations. I won't run through them all here, but you can see them listed on the screen there for the different communities that we're in for the co-op. So we are very grateful and have the opportunity to work with these folks to make the co-ops happen. And you'll hear more about the co-op process as we go along later in the presentation tonight. So one of the questions we get a lot is does Indiana have enough sun for solar? Well, as you can see from this solar intensity map, obviously the southwest part of the country is going to have the most sun, the most solar resources, but we do very well here in Indiana. Just by comparison, Germany, which is about the size of Indiana, has, you can tell by the shading here in the blue and the purple, much less sun, much less solar resources, and yet they are a leading country in solar energy in the world. So if Germany has enough, we have enough. And in fact, there was some statistics that came out recently that Indiana was the fastest growing states, one of the fastest growing states in the country for solar energy. So yes, we can have solar just easily here in the Hoosier State. And you can see that by these maps here, that solar has been growing greatly in the state, been just expanding across the state from 2011 to 2017 and to 2019. Folks are, as the slide says, seizing their energy freedom across Indiana. So we're going to do this presentation in 3 parts. The first part is going to be talking about solar technology. Then we'll take a little break and check in on questions, and then we'll cover how solar co-ops work, and again, take another break and check in on questions, and then wrap things up with a quick trip through solar economics. So to begin with, on solar technology, how does the solar panel work? Well, we're talking tonight about solar photovoltaic technology, or solar PV technology. And that's the majority of today's solar market is in PV technology. There's other types of solar technology out there, such as thermal, but what we're going to focus on is PV, and it's the most economic form of solar technology available today. And so that's what we're going to focus on. And we're going through some important terminology as we get through this presentation. And we want to start with kilowatts versus kilowatt hours. A kilowatt is a unit of power or potential energy, and it's used to describe the size of a solar system in 1,000-watt increments. So 1,000 watts equals 1 kilowatt. So a system that is made up of 10 300-watt panels would have a size of 3,000 watts, or in other words, 3 kilowatts. And then in turn, a kilowatt hour is a unit of energy production or use. It's what you see on your utility bill. And it's used to describe the amount of electricity that a system will produce. And so most homeowners, as it says, installs systems between 2 kilowatts and 12 kilowatts. And then most US households average around 877 kilowatt hours a month in energy use. So again, potential energy and how a system is measured in size, and then the amount of energy used that you can see on your electricity bill, that's the kilowatt hours. So here's a very simple diagram about how a solar system is going to work in most homes. First, you have, number one, the solar array on top of your house. That's what produces the electricity from the sun. Sun shines on it. Those panels will produce DC electricity, direct current electricity, and it will send that to the solar inverter, number 2 in that diagram. And the solar inverter converts that DC electricity to AC, or alternating current electricity. And that's the type of electricity that you'll use in your home. And that inverter then will send that electricity to the electrical panel where it is used in your home to power your refrigerator, or turn on the lights, or if you have an electric furnace or electric heat pump, to keep the place warm. And then finally, any electricity that you do not use, any excess electricity that you're generating and aren't using at that point, it gets sent out through the utility meter to the electrical grid, and it's used up by your neighbors. So that's a quick zip through of how that works. So let's break that down a little bit more into the different parts of the system. The first component are panels. A solar panel is made up of individual solar cells made of silicon. And these are protected by a very thick layer of glass. Think about, your windshield as a protective layer over that. There are typically 60 or 72 cells per module, which is another word for a panel. And these panels are around 6 feet by 3.5 feet wide. So good size of a good size American flag. Given the size of these, open space on your roof is a must. And these panels are generally guaranteed to produce electricity for 25 years. Typically, in the 25th year, they're going to generate 80 to 90% of the electricity that they generated in the first year. So that's quite a consistent rate of production there. And when these panels are strung together into multiple panels, they form a solar array, which again is measured in kilowatts, the size of that. The second part of the components we want to talk about are the inverters. And what an inverter does is, as we talked about earlier, it will change DC electricity into AC electricity. And this happens to a couple of different types of inverters. One type is a string inverter. This one will be centrally located in the system, and it will draw in electricity from all the panels. And then the second type of inverter is a microinverter. And these are installed individually on each of the panels. And so what happens is, in the case of a string inverter, when, say, sun goes behind a cloud and covers one of the panels, and that panel isn't producing as much electricity as the other panels are, well, that's going to bring the electricity produced throughout the system down. It'll reduce the electric output of the system as a whole when one of the panels is down. Whereas and that's the case with a string inverter. Whereas the case with a microinverter, if one of those panels goes down, it isn't producing as much electricity because, like I said, a cloud going by, a shadow on the panel, then that just individual panel will just go down its electrical production. The rest of the system, if it's in full sunshine, will produce just as much electricity as it always has. So that's one purpose. That's one different distinction between the two inverters, and that's how they serve their one purpose. Now, the way to maximize a string inverter is to use an optimizer, and that will help compensate for some of that loss of power when one of the panels isn't producing as much as the others. So you can kind of think of a string inverter as like a Christmas tree light string. Back in the old days, when one light bulb would go out, the whole string wouldn't work. And while it doesn't go completely out, it does reduce the power in a string inverter when panels is out. Whereas a microinverter, if one panel or one Christmas light bulb, in that example, goes out, the rest of the string, the rest of the array will keep producing. Now, another purpose that inverters serve is when the power in the grid goes out, when there's a blackout, a loss of power in the grid, the inverters will cut power from the solar panels, sending electricity out into the grid. In fact, it will shut the whole system down so that it doesn't send electricity out into the grid. And it does this as a safety feature. A lot of folks may be disappointed that, hey, when the power's out, I can't, in the grid, I can't produce electricity at my house. Well, the reason for that is there may be electric company utility workers out on the poles or on the lines trying to fix things, and we don't want to send any unexpected electricity out and cause them any harm or injury. So it's a safety feature. If you happen to have a battery backup, then you're able to use the electricity from the battery. But the string inverter will cut the string or microinverter will cut the electricity from the system as a whole when there is a battery or a power outage on the grid. And which inverter makes most sense for you will sort of depend on your situation. That's really a conversation you want to have with your installer. If you get to that point, you're getting a design for a system, your installer can advise you on that. Then another component is, of course, the electric panel. And that's where the solar array and the solar system, the inverter sends the electricity into your home. It's a simple connection in the panel. And again, most homes don't need upgrades before they go solar. If it's an older panel, in rare cases, you might have to do a replacement of that. And those replacement costs can hover anywhere from $1,000 to $2,000. But typically, you won't have to worry about that. Most panels these days can handle a solar system just fine. The next component is the racking system. This is the system that allows the panels to be mounted on your roof. And these panels will attach to these cross beams with screws and clips. And those beams are attached to the roof, your roof, in a variety of ways. It kind of depends on the type of roof you have. Whoops, that didn't go. My apologies. We'll go back to here. And there we go. So there's lots of different ways for your system to attach to your roof. Any kind of roof that's out there, there's a way to attach a panel to it. But sometimes if it's a typical asphalt roof, you'll see flashing on there that will, the racks will mount through the with flashing under the asphalt, so there's no leakage, even though there's hole penetrations maybe in the roof. That will work just fine. Ballast system for various kinds of roofs. If you've got a flat roof, a clay roof, or whatever it might be, there's a way to attach that. And in fact, the companies that install these will provide guarantees against roof leakage if there are penetrations, say from nails or screws or whatever it might be. So there's a system that'll work for your home. And here's an example of a standing seam metal roof with this racking system that'll work on that. And sometimes if folks don't have a roof that'll work for solar, they can, and they have the property space available to them, they can mount the system on the ground. There's usually a little bit more increase in the cost of that for things like trenching to run the lines from the panels to the electrical panel in the house. But this will work just fine. In fact, sometimes people prefer this. They can orient the panels in a way, maybe directly south, that makes sense. And this works particularly well in rural areas where their folks might have a little more property to use for ground mounted solar. But we always encourage folks to use roofs because, hey, that's a good place to use and you're not using it for anything else. So that works. But either way will work just fine. So what's a good roof for solar? Well, that sort of depends. Depends on your situation. Obviously, the best roof will face directly south, due south. But in our latitude, a roof that faces east or west will work just fine. If it's facing north, that doesn't work for solar, but certainly east, west, or south will work just fine. And as I mentioned before about shading, reducing the production of electricity from a solar panel, you want to stay away from tree shading or anything that block the sun on your panels. You want to make sure there's enough space for the panels. You typically need about 200 square feet of unobstructed roof space for a system that's between 2 and 2.5 kilowatts, which is kind of a minimum size that most installers will do. Now, important thing to note about that is that it doesn't necessarily have to be 200 square feet in one straight rectangle panel. If you've got a chimney maybe coming up or a vent coming up in the middle of the roof, or you've got multiple sides of a roof that are smaller, but together you can get 200 good square footage of roof space for panels, and then your installer can work with you to try to figure out how to make that work. But I've seen all kinds of systems work their way around different configurations on roofs. So, but 200 square feet is kind of the minimum to have for unobstructed space. And then finally, the roof condition. There needs to be more than 10 years of life left in a roof if you're going to put a system on. If it has less than 10 years of life left in it, we recommend replacing the roof before going ahead with solar. Your installer won't want to work with a roof maybe that already has some leaks or some damage to it. If you find that you have a situation where you want to go solar and your roof doesn't have a lot of life left in it, your installer will work with you maybe to find either some of them actually do roof installations. Most of them are going to know roofers that they can work with to make sure that happens before the system is installed. And you want to be sure to do that because you don't want to discover a few years down the road that your roof is leaking. You got to take the panels off and replace the roof because that's an added expense for you. Another component, I mentioned this earlier in passing, is batteries. You know, when the power goes out and the grid is down and the solar system shuts off, some folks want batteries in order to keep some of their electric systems in their house working. And so that's a consideration, and it's important. The value of battery storage is that if you have frequent utility outages in your area, you might want battery storage. If you have critical loads at home, like a well pump or medical equipment that you don't want to make sure keeps running in the event of a power outage, it's another good reason. Some folks think of it as emergency or disaster preparedness. And if you want to learn more, you can see the URL address there of our storage guide at our website, or if you just go to the website, solarunitedneighbors.org, and type in the search storage or batteries, you can get that guide there. The one thing we suggest you don't think about batteries as a way to get paid for sending electricity out to the grid. The cost of batteries have come down greatly, but they haven't come down enough where that makes economic sense to think of it as I'm going to store some power and then send it out to the grid later, and I'm going to make some money off of that way. It unfortunately doesn't work out well that way, but there's lots of other reasons that folks may want to have the battery. So to recap, this is our simple diagram of how a solar system works. The solar arrays are mounted on top of the house. They generate electricity from the sun and send that DC electricity to the inverter, where it converts it to AC power and sends it to the electrical panel, where that gets used up by the house. And then if the system is producing more electricity than the house uses, it sends it out through the utility meter out to the grid, and it gets used up by your neighbors. But how does adding a solar system interact with your electrical bill, and how can you earn back your investment in a solar system? Well, to begin with, we want to talk about net metering. And net metering is the basic idea that of equal compensation or trade for the excess electricity that you generate. If you're generating electricity and you don't use it all, and you send it out to the grid, and you send out 1 kilowatt hour of electricity into the grid, then you get credit through your utility for 1 kilowatt hour that you can use up later when your system isn't producing enough electricity to cover your electrical use at your house. It's a fair one-to-one trade. And a good way to think about this are these two diagrams here. On the left, daily solar production; on the right, monthly solar production. With most households in the US these days, the peak electricity use is going to be at the beginning of the day when people are getting ready for work or school, and at the end of the day when they're home. Not surprisingly, the peak production of solar energy is going to be in the middle of the day. The sun is the highest when people aren't typically home using as much electricity. So what net metering does, it allows you to store up credit for those times in the middle of the day when you're producing more electricity than you need. You're sending it out to the grid. And then you can use up those credits in the morning and the evening when you're in turn using more electricity than you're producing. Or you can think about this in a monthly and a yearly way. There are times of the year, the summer months, when the sun is higher and the days are longer, and you're producing more electricity than you might be using at that time. And then you can store up credits from those months and use them up in the months when January, December, February, when you're not producing as much electricity as you might use up in your home. So net metering allows you to do that. Now, important to note that in this example, these are examples for a system that is designed to produce 100% of the electricity that a household might use. A lot of folks get electrical, or I should say solar systems that aren't designed to produce that much electricity. They're only designed to cover maybe 30% or 75% of the household's use. Even in those systems, though, there are going to be times when the system is producing more electricity than you're using. So net metering is still important, but just want to point out that that's the assumptions behind these diagrams. So net metering allows you to store up those credits daily and across the year. So net metering, however, in Indiana is scheduled to be phased out by the largest utilities. Now, net metering is something that is a law that covers the 5 large investor utilities that cover the vast majority of the state: Duke, AES Indiana, NIPSCO, and then Indiana Michigan, or I&M, as well as Vectren. And so the rural electric cooperatives and municipal electrical utilities are not covered by the net metering, but these 5 utilities it is, and they, like I said, cover a vast majority of the state. And so back in 2017, the Indiana legislature passed a law that is in the process of doing away with net metering. So net metering will end for all Indiana utility customers in July 1st of next year, of 2022. Now that net metering may end sooner depending on the utility, and in fact, Vectren has, by some triggers in the law, ended its net metering in the southern part of the state. But right now, net metering is going to continue with NIPSCO, Duke, AES Indiana, and Indiana Michigan for residential customers up until the end of June of next year. NIPSCO, they might end it sooner for business or commercial customers. And some of the nuances and the details of this phase out are still being worked out by the Utility Commission for the state. So the best rule we can tell people is, if you get your system installed, if you join a co-op and you go with the co-op's timeline and you get your system going and in place by the end of 2021, end of this year, which is completely doable with the co-ops, then you will have net metering. And that net metering will last by law until 2032, end of June 2032. So you'll get net metering for 10 plus years. After that, when net metering goes away, for folks that install their system after July 1, 2022, or folks whose net metering runs out in 2032, and there are some folks who installed net metering earlier and they have net metering until 2047. Whenever net metering runs out for you, the compensation, the trade that you get for the electricity you send out, that excess generation into the grid, is going to be much lower. It's going to be about the wholesale rate plus another 25%. And it's going to be measured possibly in some different ways than are typically measured now. Altogether, what that means is folks are going to get a far less compensation for their excess electricity than they get right now from their solar system. So it's important that we work to change those laws to try to extend net metering. And we're working on that with Solar United Neighbors and many of our statewide partners. And we'll talk a little bit about that more towards the end of tonight's presentation. So let's move on to some frequently asked questions. How long do systems last? Well, as I mentioned earlier, they generally are guaranteed for 25 years with their power production warranty, which means generally at the end of that 25th year, they're going to produce 80 to 90% of the level of electricity they produced in the first year. Now, of course, they're going to keep producing beyond that at lower levels, but that's a pretty good track record of producing electricity over those first 25 years. There's also product warranty for the panels from defects that result from improper manufacturing. Those are typically around 10 years. Inverters, their warranties will last anywhere from 10 to 25 years. String inverters for 10 to 13 years, and micro inverters and DC optimizers are around 25-year warranty. And also there's our labor warranties from the installation companies. Those are going to be anywhere from 2 to 10 years, and sometimes longer for more established companies. So if and when you sign a contract to purchase a system, make sure you see all the warranties, understand them, and know who to contact if you have an issue. These systems are fairly maintenance-free. There's no moving parts in them, so things are less likely to break. Normal precipitation will keep the panels clean. And if you get snow in the wintertime, that might cover them, that might reduce the production for that day, but generally these melt pretty quickly when the sun comes out. And you'll also, with most systems these days, you'll get an app that will monitor production and email you if something is going wrong. So be aware of that. Now, I talk to a lot of solar owners who pull out their apps frequently during the day to figure out how their system is doing. So it's kind of a fun bonus to have, and you can monitor the performance of the system as well. Property value and taxes. Your property values will, well, I should say that there's no Indiana-focused research on this, but national evidence shows that property values actually tend to go up. $1 invested equals about a $1 increase in property value. And so if you go to sell your home, it's important that you let your realtor know that the system is there, because a lot of times that's a selling point for the house. And again, will increase the value of the home often, but you need to talk to your realtor to confirm that in your situation. Assessed property values do not go up in the state of Indiana. You can file a form that will guarantee that, so that your property values will not go up when the system is added. Homeowners insurance, these generally will not go up, but you need to let your homeowners insurance company know that the panels are there. As I said, most folks don't see an increase when they install a system, but if for some reason in your situation you do, be sure and shop around, because a lot of companies will offer consistent rates on panels that don't go up when they're installed, and sometimes even offer discounts. Already covered weather damage and snow cover on that. As far as homeowners associations or HOAs, many of them may not be well informed of the laws regarding HOAs, and so we have a guide with resources and information on our website that you can use. Really encourage you to work with the leadership in your HOA. Sometimes, or oftentimes, it may not be an issue if you can mount the panels on the side of the house or a garage or whatever that's not facing the street. So these will work with HOAs in many instances, but it's important that you are in communication with the leadership for those. And the same goes with historic districts. These restrictions, like HOAs, are going to vary from area to area. You want to reach out to the historic district's leadership to find out what the rules are. But again, oftentimes if the panels aren't visible from the street, it's not necessarily an issue. Well, that gets us to the end of the section on solar technology. How are we doing, Zach? Do we have any questions that we need to address at this point?
Sorry, I was actually responding to one. So yes, we did have one question about how resilient are panels to hail damage. We got one response from Ray Wilson, who is a solar owner on the line with us, who I reshared. But is there anything else that you'd like to add about hail?
No, I think Ray is an expert as much as anybody is on this, so that's fine. That's fine.
Yeah. So what Ray pointed out is that he's seen warranties that cover up to 1-inch hail, like 60 miles per hour. We definitely, excuse me, see hail here in Indiana, and I think that if it's not covered by warranty, I really haven't seen any homeowners that have had much problem. We've had folks who've had their roofs next to their solar panels damaged by hail, and their panels come through it just fine.
Yeah, I was going to say,
the panels are definitely designed to handle the elements.
Yeah, I was going to say it's probably more likely that the hail is going to damage the roof than it is the solar panel. So, yeah.
We got one other question from Todd Duffy, who sent it just to the panelists. It's an interesting question. He says, if you place panels on an outside structure that you can see the underside of the roof, what if any parts of the installation process will you see that extend to the underside of the roof? That's an interesting question. I think it would probably depend on the details of the installation and the structure. So it's hard to answer in the abstract, but I do see that we have some installers on the line as well. So if you have a response to that question about if you place panels on an outside structure where you can see the underside of the roof, what if any parts of the installation process will you see that extend to the underside of the roof? That would be interesting. I'm not really familiar with an installation that shows much of the underside under the roof. So I think I have a hard time answering that in the abstract without seeing the structure. But thank you for the question, Todd. Sorry, I don't have a more satisfying answer for you.
Yeah, I would think that would depend on the ranking system. Yeah, so it would sort of vary from situation to situation. Yeah.
Yep. And it looks like we got one more question from Ben asking if we can touch on solar panels and EV charging, and that is coming up later in the presentation. So I will send it back to you, Dan.
All right. So let's move on to our second part of our presentation tonight, and that's how solar co-ops work. And a co-op is simply a group of homeowners and business owners all going solar together to get a group price and support in the process of purchasing solar. It's just about collaboration and working together. And we really rely on that collaboration to spread the word about the co-ops, to ask co-op members to spread the word with their friends and families. The more people we get signed up, the better deal we can get with an installer. So why go solar with a co-op? Well, there's lots of reasons. First off, value. Installers see a group of knowledgeable people about solar and interested in a solar system, and so they want your business. Sun helps the group solicit bids from a number of installers, so the co-op members are best able to choose the bid that they think works the best for the group. Support throughout the process. Sun is with you every step of the way to support you and answer questions and help you work with the installer that is working with the co-op. We are vendor or installer neutral. So we're looking out for the best interests of the co-op members, and the co-op members, and I'll talk about this in a moment, are the ones that choose the installer, not Solar United Neighbors. So we are neutral in that sense, but we're here to support you. And then finally, you get to connect with other solar enthusiasts. Help from Sun, help and support comes from Sun, but it also comes from members of the co-op and other folks who have gone solar. Ray Wilson answering that question tonight is a great example of that, as I'm sure there's other solar owners on the call as well. And when you connect with other solar enthusiasts, you're also getting a chance to be part of a growing solar movement. People that are making sure everyone has the right and the ability to go solar. Now, when you sign up for a co-op, you are automatically made a member of Solar United Neighbors. It's free to join the co-op. And when you do, you get a Sun sticker and a magnet, a 10% discount at the online store for all things Solar United Neighbors. and invitations to member-only events, and easy access to resource guides that are in our member portals. So a lot of benefits come from that. And again, it's free to join the co-op. So a really important question, and this is really important to me as a staff person, something that made me really attracted to working for Solar United Neighbors, is who picks the installer? And the short answer to that is the co-op members do. Any co-op member can volunteer to be on the installer selection committee. And what happens is the staff for Sun, we survey the co-op members to find out what's important to them. You know, is price the most important thing? Is equipment quality most important or second important? Where the company is located, their experience, the diversity of their staff or their company employees, whatever it might be. We survey the co-op members to find that out. And then at the same time, we've solicited bids from a group of installers who are wanting to install systems in that co-op's area. And we ask them all kinds of questions about their again, same kinds of things, their price, their equipment quality, the things you see listed on the screen there. And so we take all that information from those bids and we compile them into a summary document as well as the individual bids themselves. And we share that information along with the results from the survey of the co-op members with the members of the installer selection committee. And then the committee considers all that information, and the members of the committee choose the installer that they think provides the best value for the co-op. So here's that co-op process in a little bit more detail. First is the outreach phase. And this is the time when we're reaching out to folks, letting them know that the co-op is launched, that it's up, that it's welcoming members, that it's looking for folks to join the co-op and be a part of the solar movement here in Indiana and to consider buying a system. And we're signing folks up for that. Typically, this period's going to last about 5 or 6 months from the start of the co-op. There is a deadline for people to join the co-op. And so, again, we're encouraging folks to tell their friends and neighbors. Now, it's during this time that people are signing up. And so when folks sign up, we do an initial roof assessment. The Solar United Neighbors Go Solar staff will look at typically a Google Maps picture or some other satellite photo of your property and your home or your garage, and we'll assess whether or not, just initially, whether or not that roof will work for solar. And every once in a while, a roof won't work, but most of the time, the vast majority of the time, it does. And the reason we do this is, one, so we don't waste your time. If your property or if it's a ground mount or your roof isn't going to work for solar, we want to let you know that, and you don't have to go through the process of the co-op. But it also is attractive to installers because they know that these members of the co-op have been pre-vetted by Sun's staff as roofs or properties that would be good for solar. So that all happens in that first outreach phase. And we have a couple of co-ops in this outreach phase right now up in the Fort Wayne area and in Northern Indiana co-op working on this outreach stage. Then the second part of this is the selection process. And so once a co-op has around 30 members or so, we'll put out a call for folks to join the installer selection committee. And so, as I mentioned before, we have a competitive bid process where we gather bids from various installer companies. We review those bids, we call references, check licensing, equipment, and warranties, and we gather all the information and share that with the installer selection committee. They come together, and the committee decides what installer to go with. And that's going to usually happen around the third month time period, but again, it depends on how fast that co-op membership grows. It could happen a little sooner, it could happen a little later, it just depends. And right now, 3 of our co-ops, Indianapolis, Hamilton, and Boone, just finished up this process and have selected an installer. So they just finished up the second phase of the co-op process. Then the final stage is the installation stage. And this is going to typically be around 4 to 8 months where this will happen. So after an installer is selected, those installers will schedule site visits with the members of the co-op to come out and may put together a custom design and a custom quote using the price set for the co-op for each individual property owner, homeowner, business owner. Then the homeowner, business owner will look at that quote and decide whether or not they want to purchase a system right now. We hope as many people will, but that's strictly up to the co-op member. There's no obligation, no commitment to do that until you get to this stage. Then if you decide to purchase a system, you sign a contract. There's going to be a deadline typically for that in which you need to decide whether or not you're going to sign a contract. And then the installation happens and we have a celebration at the end of the co-ops process. We've been doing those online so far with the pandemic in the last few months, but hopefully get back to in-person celebrations pretty soon. The other thing I want to say about this installation process and the signing of the contract is when someone signs a contract, built into that contract price, it's not something separate, but built into the contract price, is a $600 fee that comes back to Solar United Neighbors for our work in putting the co-op together and connecting potential purchasers with the installer companies. That's lower than the typical referral fee that happens in the industry. So that comes back to help support the work of Solar United Neighbors. And in those places where we're co-sponsoring a co-op with Solarize Indiana, we split that fee. So that's the co-op process. Anything else we want to say at this point, Zach, or anything else we need to touch on? Any questions in the chat?
Nope, I don't see any questions at the chat this time.
All right, then we're going to move on to solar economics. I'd like to start off with this chart because it demonstrates that big fat red line through the middle there is the average of the different large investor-owned utilities in the state of Indiana and how their prices have gone up an average of 40% over the last 10 years. That's a pretty big jump in electricity prices. So you figure you're going to be paying somebody for electricity over the next 30 years. You might as well make an investment today, right? That will pay you a return down the road. At the same time, while electricity prices have been going up, the affordability and the prices of has been going up. The price of solar systems have been coming down. Over the last 7 years, you can see a decrease on average across these systems of around 65 cents per kilowatt hour, which is a pretty big, I should say not kilowatt hour, but per watt. It's a pretty big decrease. Now, these you'll see also that the co-op prices on average are slightly less than that. So that's why it's a good thing when you get an opportunity to join a co-op. It can mean lower prices on the purchase of a system. Now, when we break down the costs of a solar system, there are three kinds: soft costs, labor costs, and system components. And you can see that the system components have come down quite a bit over the last few years for solar systems, and that's been pretty consistent decrease. And the labor costs have decreased a little bit too, but what has not decreased and has increased as a percentage of the solar system purchase are the soft costs. And these include permitting for the system, engineering reviews, having the installer company deal with homeowners associations or historic districts, dealing with utilities on the interconnections. But it also is a big chunk of that is the marketing and customer acquisition costs, the money that companies spend in order to get customers. And this is where Solar United Neighbors can help installers and help customers, because we streamline that process, make it simple and easy, and cut down on the cost of that. And that's oftentimes where the savings come in when you get quoted the price on a solar system. These next couple of slides, we're going to do a look at some example pricing for AES Indiana, which used to be Indianapolis Power and Light, and then Duke as well on this particular site. And I don't want you to get too caught up in the actual, the specific numbers of these, but just sort of the general trends of how the economics of a system work out. So in the average Indiana solar co-op pricing of around $2.56 a watt, you're going to see over $10,000 price on installing a 4 kilowatt system and over $20,000 in an 8 kilowatt system. When you factor in the 26% federal tax credit that's going to take that off the cost of the system, that brings it down to approximately $7,600 and $15,000. Then you look at your electric savings in the first year. See that there, $630 and $1,260, depending on the size of the system, and multiply that out over 10 years. You're going to see an estimated savings by year 2032 of $7,500 or $15,000 on the system. And over the estimated life of a system of 25 years, that's going to be about $14,000 or $29,000. So again, these are making some assumptions that electricity prices go up 2% each year. And then this is based on some wholesale electric rates over the course of those years going up to a certain percentage. So that's why I don't get you too caught up in the specific numbers, but you can see right now how the system works out, including in this net metering, which is very important in how the money figures into the net savings on the system over that 25-year period. And you can see a similar sort of example here with I&M, Indiana, Michigan. Again, the net savings or net profit, I should say, over that 25-year period, fairly significant on a system. Again, that's making some assumptions that net metering continues to be in place. Now, someone mentioned EV chargers before. All of the companies that are submitting bids for the co-ops that we have going on in the state right now are going to have the ability to install a level 2 EV charger in the home, if that's what you want. Those prices are typically going to run between $500 or possibly over $700. Installation anywhere from $500 to $2,000 plus, and so a total cost for that charger is $1,000 to $2,700, or a little more. People do have the option of purchasing just a system, or purchasing just a level 2 charger, or purchasing both of those together. So there's flexibility built into that as well. And one thing I forgot to say too about, I'm going to go back up real quick. On the federal tax credit, I do want to say that sometimes folks don't pay enough taxes in a year to get all that tax credit back in the first year that they file their taxes. So that tax credit can be rolled over for typically for up to 5 years. You'll want to talk with your tax professional about that to get the specifics. But just know you don't have to use that up in the first year, that will roll over a few years in order for you to take full advantage of that tax credit. So sorry, I forgot to mention that earlier. And I see here that the tax credit is decreasing. It's 26% this year. It'll be 26% next year. It'll be going down to 22% in the following year, and it is scheduled right now at least to go away in year 2024. So between net metering disappearing at the end of June of next year and the tax credit only being around for the next few years, now is the best time to go solar, because it's going to guarantee the best economics for you in purchasing a system. A lot of different financing options out there for a solar system. Loans obviously are available to folks. A home equity line of credit, standard loans, solar, bridge loans are available. You can refinance and include the solar system in that. There's various programs for that. And there are also financial institutions out there like the Clean Energy Credit Union or Community First Credit Union that are specifically geared towards helping people purchase systems. We're vendor neutral, but we're also neutral about whatever financing system that or financial way you can have of financing your system. Obviously, cash is the best way, but very few people can afford that up front. And so we're just here to make you aware of the options and to give you some resources on you can explore those possibilities. You can do that at solarunitedneighbors.org/financing. And also, if you are in a rural area, which a lot of folks in Indiana are, especially for farmers and small businesses in rural areas, you are eligible for the USDA Rural Energy for America program, possibly eligible for that, and that will help pay for the system, make it more possible to purchase the system. And again, you can learn more about that at our website. So before I go on to what's next, Zach, I just want to check in again. Do we have any other questions or anything else we want to touch on?
Sure. We actually did get an interesting question from Ryan. He asked, how do K through 12 schools work with co-ops? And if not allowed, what are some options for schools to go solar?
Well, actually, I'm going to kick that back to you, Zach, because you've had a lot more experience working with those situations than I have.
Sure. So I was actually in process of typing up an answer, but I'll go ahead and say it out loud. So that's a great question, Ryan. Basically, schools are absolutely welcome to join the co-op. Co-ops are really open to anybody. But I would say that most K-12 schools would probably be looking at a much larger installation than what the co-op is typically designed to handle. And they also have different considerations. For instance, they wouldn't be eligible for the investment tax credit. So there are special financing options available for schools, like an option that's called a guaranteed energy savings contract, among some other things. If you are representing a school or working with a school who's interested in going solar, I'd be happy to connect with you offline and help you connect with other resources and also some other schools that have installed solar. We worked with multiple in our network, so I'd be more than happy to share additional information with you about that. Feel free to send us an email at inteam@solarunitedneighbors.org if you'd like to have more information. That's it,
Great.
Dan.
Great question. All right, good. Well, what's next? So first off, what's next? We encourage you to go to one of the websites to join a solar co-op. You'll see the 5 active co-op websites up there. Tell your friends and neighbors about that. That's a great way to get involved in solar and to learn more and possibly consider purchasing a system. But you also have the opportunity to join Indiana's growing solar movement. You can take action around legislation and policies that are going to affect solar availability here in Indiana. If you go to solarunitedneighbors.org/IN Solar Future. We're encouraging folks to contact your state legislators to let them know that you support pro-solar policies here in the Hoosier State. And you also have the opportunity to share action alerts if you sign up there at that website. Get action alerts that you can share with friends or neighbors. We have started a policy or action team to contact legislators about pro-solar legislation policies in the state. So if you want to be a part of that, let us know. Zach's going to be heading that up. We're also have started to develop a letters to the editor network, which I'm working with. And if you feel like you'd like to pen a short letter to a publication that gets printed and seen by policymakers across your area or across the state, then let us know. We'd be very happy to put you on that. We send out a request for letters about once a month, maybe twice a month. So it's not too often that we do that. But yeah, that's a great way to get involved and a great way to advocate for pro-solar policies here in the state. And finally, just a quick thank you for everybody joining us tonight. It's been great to have you here. I'm Dan Robinson, again, the Northern Indiana Field Organizer here with Zach Schalk, the Indiana Program Director. And you can always email us at inteam@solarunitedneighbors.org. And that brings us to the end of tonight's presentation. I'm going to end the slideshow here. And all right. And so we're going to be around a little bit longer for questions, and I'm happy to answer those. And,
We did get one question that came in, Dan, asking any information related to solar and radiant floor heating.
Oh, wow. To be honest with you, that's something I am not familiar with.
Okay, I'm happy to take that one. So as Dan mentioned earlier in the presentation, we really focus on PV solar. So using solar energy to create electricity. There definitely are other solar technologies, solar thermal, solar hot water, which usually the type of radiant floor heating that you're talking about is related to that. Those are oftentimes can be fairly expensive to install as like a retrofit, but can be a great option for if you're building a new property. So that's not necessarily something that we would do through the co-op, but there definitely are companies who specialize in that kind of work. And again, if you are interested in that, while it's not the main thing that we do through our co-op, if you send us an email at inteam@solarunitedneighbors.org, we'd be happy to try to help you connect with a company who might be able to help you learn more.
I would think too, it might depend on the type of radiant floor heating system you have. If it's heated through some sort of electrical mechanism, maybe that in and of itself would be powered by a PV system on a house. So I think it kind of depends on how that system functions too.
Sure. So a PV system will just create electricity that serves any load in your home. So it depends on if you're looking for something that basically is an integrated system that uses solar thermal to generate radiating heat from your floor. All right. Are there any other questions? I'm not seeing any. If not, thank you all so much for sticking around. Really appreciate it. Thanks for the thoughtful questions. And thank you, Dan, for the great presentation.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good evening. And like I said, let us know if you have anything else you want to know.
Good night.
Good night.